Can you hear it? The pulse of our region. It's starting to sound like progress. It's happening here, and here, and there, all around us. We're gaining momentum and catalyzing change. But it doesn't happen on its own. We need each other. Every person, every business, every organization, we all play a role. We're leading. We're collaborating. We're growing. Yeah, we've had some wins. But we still have work to do. We're leveraging our assets. Investing in innovation. And creating opportunities for everyone here to share in this momentum. The pulse of our region is strong. It's steady. It's rhythmic. Can you hear it? Can you see it? Are you a part of it? Every beat represents the commitment, the drive, the determination that is uniquely Akron. Our progress is palpable, but we've only just begun. We're gaining traction and building something powerful, something together, something greater.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this morning's Leadership Dialogue, the work of the future. Before we begin, I'd like to take a moment to thank our presenting sponsors, Huntington National Bank, KeyBank, Retzel, and Akron Beacon Journal Local IQ. I'd also like to thank our premier sponsors, Great Work Employment Services and the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. As we all know, technology plays a part in almost everything we do. From the smartphones we use and the virtual connectivity we are leveraging this morning, to the way we perform basic office tasks and manufacture products and materials. Technology and innovation coincide with the region's vibrancy and potential for growth. And while technology has so many distinct advantages for our personal and professional lives, it's not without implications. It's true, technology changes the way we live and work, and therefore it changes the work that many of us do. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. Technology doesn't have to displace workers, but it does require that the skills of the workforce evolve to meet the level of technology. Working together, people and technology have been able to accomplish great things, and this dynamic pairing isn't going away anytime soon. Regardless of the industry, there's opportunity to innovate and leverage technology to be better, more efficient, and drive growth. This morning, we'll talk about trends in technology and the ways that in-demand skills are shifting. We'll also spend some time talking about the importance of a well-coordinated talent ecosystem where policy, business, and education and training institutions are working side by side to train for the skills needed today and anticipate those of the future. We have a dynamic panel with us this morning, and I'm honored to be able to facilitate it. But before we get to that, I'd like to introduce Tia Ramlow, President of Great Work Employment Services, to introduce our panelists. As President of Great Work, Tia is no stranger to the topic of workforce and the critical need to ensure the strong talent pipeline exists in our region. After all, she is in the business of people and talent. With that, I'd like to turn it over to you, Tia.
Thanks, Steve. I'm so honored to be here with you this morning. Workforce and talent remain one of the key challenges faced by employers across all industries, and this challenge is multifaceted. One component is having a supply of skilled recruits, and another is being able to retain that talent through continuous training and development. Our region's growth and vibrancy relies on our ability to work collectively to identify the in-demand skills of today and anticipate the ones for tomorrow. We can and need to build a robust community network that will support all our workers through the training process to ensure a stable talent pipeline. As such, our conversation this morning is very timely, and I'm excited to have the opportunity to introduce our panelists. First, let's begin with Ben Armstrong. Ben Armstrong is the Interim Executive Director and a research scientist at MIT's Industrial Performance Center. His research and teaching examine how workers, firms, and regions adapt to technological change. His current projects include a national plan for the U.S. manufacturing workforce in partnership with the Department of Defense, as well as a regional playbook developing lessons for struggling regional economies in the United States. In his work, Ben has collaborated with governments, nonprofit organizations, and firms to understand how scholarship and education can be useful to practitioners and policymakers. Ben received his PhD at MIT. Previously, he worked at Google Inc. Next, I would like to introduce Dr. David James. Although his official title is Superintendent for Akron Public Schools for the last 12 years, I would like to add visionary. Dr. James has led the largest building renovation and consolidation project in the history of Akron schools, converting nearly all 47 Akron school buildings into modern, safe community learning centers, schools by day, community centers for residents during evenings and weekends. David continued to drive progress while navigating the challenges of COVID-19 and the turbulent world of the metropolitan city education. His stewardship and his leadership of one of Ohio's largest urban districts have been exemplary. In addition, David, his staff, and key community partners have successfully worked with Ford Next Generation Learning to have the Akron Public Schools designated as a Ford Next Generation Learning community. And as such, all high schools are now part of the new college and career academies of Akron. With 316 businesses and corporations as active partners, Akron is a national best practice for connecting students to the reality of workforce. Akron continues a strong advocacy of dual degree programs initiated by David. Students take both high school and college courses and receive a diploma and a 2-year college degree upon graduation from high school. Leadership from Dr. David James has led to a partnership with the LeBron James Family Foundation to create the I Promise School, which opened in July 2018. David James earned his Bachelor of Arts degree in economics, his master's degree from Cleveland State University in public administration, and he was also awarded the Doctor of Education from the University of Phoenix. I would also like to welcome Dr. Para Jones, president of Stark State College. Having the pleasure of working on many boards and community initiatives with her, I know Dr. Jones is deeply committed to Northeast Ohio students, businesses, and communities, as evidenced by her more than 30 years of service at Stark State. She began her academic career at Stark State and worked in various leadership capacities, from Director of Marketing to Vice President, before being named President of Spartanburg Community College in South Carolina. After 3 years at Spartanburg, Dr. Jones returned to Stark State College, where she has served as president for 9 years. Prior to academia, she worked in corporate marketing and communications for Roadway Express and also as the technical editor for Goodyear Aerospace. Dr. Jones' passion for the community college mission is driven by her belief that students are best served by affordable, quality education that leads to rewarding careers in our community and region. She currently serves or has served on the boards of many state and local professional organizations, helping each to find ways to best address the talent and workforce priorities of their stakeholders. Currently, she is a member of the Governor's Executive Workforce Board and has been active in helping the administration consider talent strategies that will best position Ohio and its companies to compete. Dr. Jones holds a PhD from the University of Nebraska, an MBA with honors from Ashland University, and a bachelor's degree magna cum laude from the University of Mount Union. And finally, I would like to welcome Dr. Ethan Karp, President and CEO of Magnet. Through his work at Magnet, Ethan has helped hundreds of manufacturing companies grow through technology, innovation, and talent. He is passionate about driving economic prosperity in his home region of the Northeast Ohio. Dr. Karp is a committed change maker and a community builder and serves on several boards throughout the region, including his role as board chair of Cleveland-Cuyahoga County Workforce Development Board. Dr. Karp is a recognized thought leader on manufacturing issues and a frequent media commentator on the future of manufacturing in America. Prior to joining Magnet in 2013, he worked with Fortune 500 companies at McKinsey & Company. He received his undergraduate degrees in biochemistry and physics from Miami University, go Redhawks, and a PhD in chemical biology from Harvard University. As someone who is on the ground working every day with companies on their talent needs and people seeking their next best opportunity, I am thrilled to have these leaders with us this morning, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about their perspective on the future of work to get some ideas about how I can put them together into action for my company. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Steve. Let's get this panel started.
Thanks, Tia. Sorry to make you do all those deep bios at 8 o'clock in the morning, but appreciate that. And we have such a, as you can hear, expert panel, people with great perspective on this. I'm looking forward to jumping into our conversation this morning. This whole issue of workforce and skilled talent is something that we've been dealing with for a long time. And today we're going to talk a little bit more about sort of where we think we're headed there with some folks who've really got some insights on. Ethan and Para and David for being part of this morning. I'm looking forward to getting into the conversation. So I'm going to start, Ben, with you, and we're going to start a little level setting here. I want to sort of understand where we are today. And so, Ben, where do you see us with workforce right now? Talk about the size and the scope of the issue, maybe across different industries at some level, and then maybe how Akron is faring versus others. I know there's a lot there, but give us a sense of some opening thoughts to level set us.
Sure, Steve. And I think there's the kind of the pre-pandemic picture, and then we're currently in a bit of the pandemic picture of the labor market, and we're not really sure what post-pandemic looks like, although I think the trend lines in many regions and industries look pretty good. But pre-pandemic, we saw, I think after the Great Recession and 5+ years after, quite good numbers in the national labor market, pretty low unemployment overall nationally, a tight labor market, and then for the first time in a while, an increasing median wage nationally. But what those numbers I think really hide are huge regional differences between places largely on the coasts, places where you see high income growth and high employment growth, and then places in some places in the interior of the country that have struggled with lower employment growth and lower wage growth. So part of the question is why is that pattern happening? Why are these two poles really occurring? Well, one is that there are big education divides. So places with high educational attainment, typically it's been larger metro areas, have been attracting far more jobs, and those jobs have been paying higher wages. And places with historically lower educational attainment have really been struggling and lagging behind. Akron, I think, is an interesting case because if you look just at employment rate, meaning the share of the population, adult population Akron that's employed, Akron's been doing remarkably well since the 1980s. Obviously, deindustrialization, Northeast Ohio struggled overall with employment numbers in the early 80s, but since then, Akron has done remarkably well. So among the highest growth in employment rates among U.S. metro areas. But on wages, it's really lagged behind. So Akron's in this category where actually a lot of Great Lakes metros are, where employment has been good and the labor market's been relatively tight, but wages haven't really caught up. And one of the potential explanations that we can talk about today is technology adoption, educational attainment, and how you kind of match training and technology to increase wages, particularly for those without a college degree. So that's kind of the overall picture. I think about this in terms of regional diversity, and I think that helps with our discussion today. In manufacturing, an area that I study and I know of importance to Ethan and others, there's been this really interesting reversal in manufacturing where for 3 decades we saw extraordinary declines in U.S. manufacturing jobs. But since 2010, there's been a 12% increase, and there's been the beginning of new jobs in manufacturing, new types of occupations in manufacturing, due in part to technological change that are exciting. And a lot of these new jobs, they pay more than typical production jobs. But overall, like we've been saying, the average production wage in manufacturing hasn't gone up. So this is if we care about increasing the number of jobs as well as how prosperous those jobs are, we've succeeded on the number of jobs, or at least we are succeeding. We haven't really succeeded on the wage front, and that's one of the concerns in my research and that we are focused on at MIT, the quality of those jobs.
Ben, thanks, and thanks for setting the broad picture for us. Ethan, you're on the ground with you know, do you envision that the trends that our manufacturers are seeing right now are going to get more difficult around workforce, or do you see relief on the horizon? Give us a sense of what you see as you're working with companies directly.
This might sound trite, but I really believe that that future is in our hands, because unaided, without community intervention, without working together, like your beautiful video at the beginning spelled out, I think it's only going to get worse. There will be more job openings. There will be more competition from other industries from a manufacturing perspective. I think the population trends show us as the years go by, we're going to get, fewer and fewer people. So all of these reasons are, without help, nothing's going to change. And one of those help, maybe that goes across all of this, Ben, you mentioned wages, right? One of them could be wages. I think very much the conversation, particularly coming out of the pandemic, when manufacturers realized, or many more of them anyway, realized that there was 12, 14% unemployment, and yet people still weren't going into manufacturing. There were still thousands of open manufacturing jobs. And that sort of realization is how deeply embedded the issues are of getting people into manufacturing. And I'm sure we'll get into what those are and why they are. But one thing theoretically that could fix it is if wages, especially entry-level wages, go high enough, well, people are going to figure out how to get there. And that is a conversation that I've heard more of in the last 3 months than I have in the last 7 years of doing this. So I do see the possibility that wages do start going up as manufacturers see no other way around it.
Right. So Para, as you're sort of working in the space, tell us where you are right now with training and education and in this almost post-COVID world. What's shifted for you? What have you learned over the last year or so?
Yep. First thing I want to do, though, is go back to Ben's and Ethan's comments, because I think they're so important. One of the things we've learned as we've talked to our employers is that many of them are getting more involved in looking at what they're paying and other benefits, their work schedules, because they're now realizing that to be able to attract, develop, retain, and advance people, they have got to get those entry-level employees in at a pay rate with other benefits that'll keep them beyond the 90-day typical trial period. But so let me go back to your question. Sorry, Steve, I had to jump in on that because such great comments. So we're really focused, obviously, on continuing the kind of education we do in a community college, which is hands-on, skills-based. And that's been a challenge during the pandemic as we balance the health and safety of our students, faculty, and staff. But, I think what we've been able to do is balance all that. It's been over a year now. And I would say it has taken a tremendous amount of resourcefulness for us to be able to do that. But we are doing it. And all the while looking at this huge demand for workforce, especially in many of those skills-based areas. And how do we keep that flow of training and education going when we need it most, despite the interruptions. And I want to say one other thing, because I want us all to just reflect on our own lives for the past year. We've had everything we've had to juggle with professionally and personally. When I think about our students who are all working adults, they're balancing education with work on a daily basis, family, work, all these other responsibilities. Now you add the COVID, family members who are sick, family members who are learning at home. And I think we get the picture of how difficult it has been over the past year and a couple of months to keep the people we need in these education and training programs. So we're really committed to doing that, Steve, in every way that we can through being more resourceful.
I appreciate that, Para. I'm a moderator here since I guess my video is making me look like a badly dubbed foreign movie. So I apologize for that. But David, the career academies are a critical part of the APS. Can you tell us a little bit more about how they're performing? I mean, you've really figured out a way to connect the dots for students, I think. But how has the last year impacted things for you and your students in the academies?
Sure. Thank you, Steve. So the data after our first year of what we call wall-to-wall implementation, which means all of our high school students are enrolled in an academy, look very promising. We collect various outcome data. Some of it is research-based from our Summit Education Initiative. So we'll look at important measures such as grades, attendance, industry credentials earned, as well as college credit. So back in February, when I gave my State of the Schools address, I did highlight some of this information. So earning 6.5 credits as a freshman is, according to SEI's research, is a big indicator of how successful kids can be later on in high school. So we had a 12.85% increase in the number of those freshmen earning 6.5 credits as freshmen or more. We had a 6.9 increase in the number of our freshmen earning a 3.0 GPA or higher. We had a 10% decrease in the number of days that our students missed school because of a suspension. And then over $3 million in time and talent have been provided by our industry partners over the last 2 years, to engage and prepare students for their next steps. Now, because of COVID, we did see a 14% decrease in the number of industry credentials earned this last school year because of the pandemic, but we have been really working to close that gap. And, that impact has been substantial, but we really flipped with our partners to providing more experiential learning virtually for our students. And we did provide some hands-on learning as much as possible. But again, I think from a comment before, we need all hands on deck to deal with some of the issues of jobs and pipelines in our economy. And so the whole goal of our college and career academies is not necessarily, to have kids choose a field. We want kids to choose something they're interested in, and then we bring in industry partners to give them that missing information so they understand what different career fields entail. And they also along the way develop some of the soft skills that many of our employers say our young people really need.
So I think that idea of getting those young folks available and ready for moving into the workforce is so important with the partnerships that you have. Ben, as we think about technology, some folks say that, well, does that even matter because we're going to replace all these workers with robots and there's not going to be any jobs left for people, et cetera. But talk about technology and its relationship with jobs and with, I think, the way in which jobs might change going forward.
Sure. So over the past 2 years, my colleagues at MIT started out with this hypothesis, that robots are going to come in or various automation technologies, many of them software, are going to come in and replace jobs in the US and elsewhere. There was a paper a working paper really, that got a lot of attention that said, about half of American jobs were vulnerable to automation. And there were a lot of question marks around that because this isn't what we had seen historically, even through great periods of technological change. So some colleagues, some researchers across MIT, engineers, as well as social scientists, really dug into this and said, is there any evidence that we're going to see massive job replacement due to technological change? And they came back with, I think, a qualified no, that's not really on the horizon. And we've seen no evidence, even with the great technological changes of kind of the emergence of the internet and artificial intelligence, that that these technologies threaten to replace jobs. They have changed the nature of work, however, and there have been many new occupations, occupational categories created as a result. So one of the points of emphasis I think is important is the change in the types of jobs that are available and the tasks that those jobs are expected to perform. So, of course, that the tasks that human workers are going to perform might change when technologies are able to do tasks that human workers previously performed. Now, is that a bad thing? In many cases, not necessarily. You think about a manufacturing context where there might have been a dangerous task that a worker performed, but now we can automate, or just a boring task like loading a machine that now we can do in an automated way. that doesn't take away a job for a worker. Instead, it makes that job more cognitively intensive, potentially more productive and higher paying as a result. So really what we looked at, or what my colleagues looked at in this report, was the impact of technological change on really the inclusiveness and the equality of work, as well as for opportunities for people with lower levels of education. So historically, technology, over the past 40 years, technology has derived benefits for people with a college degree and above, but it's actually reduced opportunities and really it seems to have suppressed wages for people with lower levels of education. The question, I think, for the next 40 years and thinking about how technology can be more inclusive and really contribute positively to job quality is how technology can make jobs better and more available to people with alternative paths beyond a college education, which is the majority of the American workforce.
So Ethan, you got a perspective on this, I'm sure, working on the ground with manufacturers. How do you feel this impact of technology and innovation sort of intersects with people?
We have the surveys, we have all the data that shows that our manufacturers overwhelmingly look to technology, even robotics and automation, to augment what's actually happening. So how do you take 30% out of somebody's job that was the repetitive, boring piece by having a collaborative robot that works right next to you, that does not need protective shielding, because that's the whole point of being collaborative. It can work right next to you. How do you then make use of that extra 30%? And mind you, when there are thousands of open manufacturing jobs, it's not so hard to imagine that they're not replacing anybody. If anything, they're just getting a little bit more ahead with all the openings that they currently have. That being said, when we talk about how manufacturing has changed because of it and how those jobs, as Ben said, right, the wages have raised for those that now need more skills to be able to operate those very expensive machines, to program them, to engage with them, although that is also becoming much more accessible and easy at all levels for people to engage in. And it does create a wealth disparity issue. I can't hide from that this is as the entire country goes, this is the same issue. More automation, higher productivity per person means more wealth concentration as those individuals' wages grow. So from an inclusivity standpoint, which I think there's very real implications of, it's incumbent upon manufacturers, us as a community, to say, right now, while there are all these open jobs with rising wages, good middle skills jobs, the type of stuff that para trains for every single day, we need to make sure that we are getting everyone into those pathways. And Black and brown people, diverse communities, everything we have been talking about that we need as a nation, as a community, we need to be intentionally figuring out how and what other barriers might those individuals be facing, be it culture inside a manufacturing environment, transportation, lack of awareness of the career field. We need to be going after all of those things so that at the very least, even if wealth is being concentrated, it is being concentrated and spread out in an equitable way across our communities. So technology is actually an accelerator of wealth. It's going to be an accelerator to getting people, into the middle class and prosperous and beyond, because these jobs are technical, because they do pay those higher wages, if, again, we're very intentional about bringing them in. Now, the last thing I will say is, I'm speaking from a manufacturing perspective, but all of the, I would say fear-mongering, it's not really so bad, but the sensationalist headlines that talk about all these jobs are going to be automated in the next X number of years. I mean, I do believe, looking at the state of automation, there will be plenty of jobs automated, but they're likely not going to be in manufacturing. Manufacturing has spent the last 40 years upgrading its automation, its capabilities. A lot of the job decrease in manufacturing over the last 40 years, which has sort of bottomed out and, as Ben said, is even growing now, has been because of the efficiency of technology. Manufacturing's entire story, from doing things manually to the Model T, it's been one of automation and technology. So this is just a normal path.
So, Ethan, you cut out there for a second, but I think we got your point in terms of how technology is
more productive.
Whoops, there, he's back now. But I think we understood the point that you were trying to make. So as we think about this, then, when we did our work for Elevate Greater Akron a few years ago and took a look at some of the numbers, we saw this issue where while the need for higher skills was increasing significantly in our region, our workers weren't keeping up, and we didn't have the sort of skills necessary. And so, Para, I mean, you're in the business, as Ethan said, of driving some of this work. And I think, Ethan, what you told us is that, okay, we're going to see this increase in need of skills and capabilities, and that's going to increase wealth, but there are going to be people get left behind. Focusing in terms of the most in-demand skills that you think that we have out there today that we've got to sort of deal with and we've got to address.
Steve, I think you were addressing me on in-demand skills.
Yes, I was.
Okay, thank you. You cut out for a minute. Sorry.
Right.
Okay, so I want to double down on what Ethan just said. Without a doubt, in manufacturing, but also across other key industry sectors, healthcare, IT, even many of our, kind of public service jobs, we are seeing a huge demand for more technical skills. So some of the most in demand, if I just tell you who calls our career services office on a regular basis and what are our top requests: industrial maintenance, commercial driver's license, nursing, and that's everything from state tested nurse assistant to LPN to RN, medical assisting, welding, machining. Every one of those jobs has technology embedded in it. Those are the highest demand skills right now. And we continue to monitor that through so many different resources available. Obviously our career services office, what are our employers in the region asking for that's critical? Our Ohio Means Jobs, Connexus NEO, and the Team NEO Aligning Opportunities Report. I mean, these are all providing sort of real-time employer information. Probably the best resource we have are our own employer advisory committees for every one of our applied technology programs. We meet at least twice an academic year, and our employers tell us what they need and what's changing in their workforce.
And keep in mind, all those technical degrees where I was ending there a second ago, all those technical degrees aren't looking at all the jobs that will be automated in fast food and retail and those sectors, which will then need these trainings to be able to get themselves on even better paying career paths. But the ones that are out there today, I mean, in many ways, COVID and a lot of those jobs, while of course they're coming back after COVID, those are the ones that are the most vulnerable for future automation at this point. So we've got to keep an eye for all those individuals who maybe didn't join and didn't go to school during COVID for whatever reason, that we start talking to them about this is, you might have thought in the past manufacturing was the shaky career path, not
Right.
to the ones that are going to go.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense, Ethan. David, as you think about the enrollment in your career academies, how do the selections the students are making, what they're gravitating towards, line up with what is out there and in demand by employers?
Sure. So our whole motto is centered on providing high quality opportunities for these in-demand career fields. So of course, I've stolen a lot of the work that Para does and Connexus NEO. They're our partners. So we have those, we can get that work from our industry councils and our academy councils. So right now, Para mentioned that example, healthcare and biomedical science career fields, they're not only in high demand and high wage. I mean, we have a current enrollment of over 450 students in grades 10 through 12 and pathways related to those areas. We also support 7 information technology pathways. We have a great partnership with Stark State and University of Cincinnati with IT. And so we have a total enrollment in those different pathways of about 600. So the healthcare, biomedical science, IT, and business pathways are the most popular. We do have manufacturing pathways, and we've worked with Stark State to make sure that the machines that we use are similar to what they'll see at their Advanced Technology and Manufacturing Center on Stark's campus. And then, that interest, that student interest, it's really developed through our academy prep and freshman seminar courses. And overall, we have about 58 to 60 pathways, and our enrollment is pretty much evenly distributed, across those different pathways that our students want to participate in.
So that's interesting that the students are exploring different things, and hopefully that will get a path of chasing their own careers. Ethan, anything you'd add in terms of biggest skill gaps in the region for manufacturing?
It's across the board in manufacturing. I mean, it's not one. Anything that says what skills are required are just reflecting what skills are actually in the region. So machining and welding and maintenance technicians, that's because those are the jobs that manufacturers need, period. They're needing people across the board. And this starts talking about, when does apprenticeship happen? We for 40 years have kind of ignored, not universally, but most of our companies have ignored apprenticeship. And the reason for that is that they were mostly losing people, as I've already said. So they were mostly decreasing their number of folks. So the folks that had the experience just kept on getting, older and older and more experienced, but they didn't need to continue training, do those apprenticeship programs. So whether it's a formal apprenticeship program or whether it's just formalized training that somebody's doing to say, welcome to the field, let me get you a broad ranging experience. And a lot of those programs are, they're coupled with college credits, such as at Stark State. At the high school level, they can be high school classes, they can be college credit plus, go after school, go during school. The whole point is embracing that education component and bringing people up. So yes, once we get people to consider the career and come in, that's exciting. But most companies look and say, whatever we have inside our organizations that we need, we will figure out how to bring them up, and they're reinventing that apprenticeship concept for themselves, leveraging our academic institutions. That's the key around what are the actual skills gaps. It's not nearly so important that we think of to ourselves, boy, we need to be the welding capital of everything. It's much more, we need to have a wide range of resources available to manufacturers to make their reinvigoration of apprenticeship real.
So that allows people to sort of progress within organizations and continue to sort of grow with the organization versus being very, apprenticeship kind of helps them evolve as their companies go along.
Absolutely. There's also an interesting chicken egg problem here too, because you need a formalized pathway to get people up. And the best way to do that is to have truly a formalized, standardized curriculum. So that's the registered component of this. And we can also augment that with little bite-sized chunks, certificates, certifications, things like this. However, those are only valuable to an employer when there's enough of them out there that they can say, oh, well, you've got this credential, good, I'm good, take, we want you. So there's this chicken or the egg of, when do you reach a critical mass where it's almost required that you one of those things to be considered, because right now folks are so desperate, they'll take one of somebody with a certificate or not a certificate. So this is another way that we as the community need to be helping to figure out what's the easiest way to get the most number of people to have those actual certifications so that it becomes basically the gold standard that a company can look to rather than just scrambling back and forth. So that is a really interesting and subtle thing going on. And I'm sure Para has more to say about that.
I do. You saw me unmute myself, didn't you? Ethan's point is excellent. And, one thing I want to emphasize, in addition to the credential being a way to really validate the competencies of anyone, and it's, sort of a third-party validation, and it has to align with academic credentials and all of that. But it really is something of value to the individual. So beyond the employer having this kind of set of credentials that are validated, the employee has portable skills through these certifications. David's doing them. We really need to increase, I think, the awareness and appreciation for that pathway from a credential to a degree to that entry-level job, and then to further learning and earning.
And it takes bold leadership from the companies, because that chicken or egg has a downside. And the downside is, if I train all of my folks and these they are valued by other people and they're valued by the individuals, well, won't they just go somewhere else? And what we need to realize is, first of all, we all need to embrace that, a rising tide lifts all boats. And secondly, bold companies that invest in their people and treat their people well and build them up have increased loyalty, not 100% of the time, but that's a hallmark of a good company, period. And so companies need to be investing in this, even if there isn't direct benefit to them, even if they could just, train people in what they want and never get them a certificate, never get them a credential, never send them to college. That's not what is in the best interest of that individual. And so the company should be investing in them, and the best companies do.
And that's,
I wonder,
go ahead.
I wonder if there's a way, you might have heard in the introduction, I was in Spartanburg, South Carolina, president of Spartanburg Community College. There was a real supply chain of manufacturers in Spartanburg because of BMW, the big BMW plant, that created a supply chain that forced all of the supply chain partners to do apprenticeships, to invest in training. And part of that whole supply chain system was that entry-level job all the way up to top-level jobs. And we lack that in many of our in manufacturing environments. I wonder if we could create that through some kind. The industry sector partnership discussions Connexus NEO is beginning to engage in. So could we create our own? So there are always those companies who are going to have the entry-level employees in manufacturing, but if we keep enough coming in, they're going to be satisfied. And then the employees have an opportunity to advance beyond that entry-level job to higher levels based on their continued learning. And they might move to another company, another role in the same company or another company, so they can keep advancing. But it really requires, I think, that kind of systematic approach to the workforce in manufacturing and in other areas. And we are seeing employers do it outside of manufacturing and healthcare, for example.
Well, and there is I think the systemic approach here is something that is challenging, because Ethan, I agree with your points that folks have to think beyond, their own needs as manufacturers and what's good for the employees. But that's good to think about. But as an employer, right, you never want to lose the people that you've invested in and trained. But your idea, Para, of these career ladders, if you will, as I've heard them called, right? Somebody had once said to me that McDonald's role in the ecosystem for workforce was to give people their first work experience and show them what work looks like, right? An easy entry-level job, not an easy job, but an entry-level job that gets them understanding what work looks like, and then they can move on to other employers. And I think in our manufacturing ecosystem, how we create those pathways requires employers to work closely together. As we think about that opening point of getting people into manufacturing, these jobs, saying there's a reluctance of some job seekers to consider this manufacturing career path. And one of our questions that we received here was that, how do you change that negative stereotype of dirty or low skill work in manufacturing? How are you thinking about imbuing sort of new realities in people about what manufacturing really is like now? And I'm not sure who that's to. That's just to,
so Steve,
yeah, go ahead.
Can I take a quick stab at that one? And so I think we have to expose more people to modern manufacturing. And modern is such an old word, but so forgive me for that. But let me give you a real life example that happened in the last 2 weeks. County Executive Shapiro connected a group of us to a major employer in Northeast Ohio that has struggled for a long, long time to find employees. This employer wanted to sit down with us. We all sat down, and the employer was very proud to tell us what they have done to improve their manufacturing jobs. Everything from the new starting wage is $15+ an hour. There's a bump up at 90 days, at 120 days, full health care on day one, a retirement plan, and they've cleaned up their manufacturing facilities. They're well lighted, they're clean. And so they really have gotten the message that manufacturing has to have a different face and a different appeal. They also have full tuition reimbursement, and they're working on career pathways. So I think there are examples out there. This is a major company. This is a large company. Not all manufacturers can do that. And so I really think, I'm sorry to go back to the industry sector partnership discussions, but if we can get our manufacturers to, they're not going to meet every month. They're too busy running their businesses, and their businesses are just-in-time businesses. We know that. But we need them to really focus on how they can work together and with us to create that workforce, and with David. David's really important to this. We have a whole group of 21 graduates about to come into the workforce. What are we doing right now to engage them to at least make them aware of the jobs that are available? So I think it's going to take that kind of effort, and I think it has to happen here, locally, regionally, but I think there are opportunities.
Anybody else want to address that one in terms of changing the image of manufacturing? Ethan, you look like you got a smile on your face on this one.
Yes, because you know what happens, it's very important, and it's part of the puzzle. These you use the word, Para, about systemic problems. These are all systemic problems, and we cannot solve just one at a time. If we do, somebody gets almost a job, and that's useless. So we have to, every intervention has to be the whole spectrum, and that takes the village. That's why we have to work together. So if there's one thing that I would love everybody to take away, is that we've got to work together. And Para's mentioned Connexus and EO. They're at the hub for this community of doing exactly that. It requires a lot of work and a lot of facilitation. And from a regional perspective, even a state perspective, that approach for manufacturing is what is being tried by these sector partnerships across the entire region. Because we also know that a lot of these issues, while they're the same problem, the solutions are specific to, which education institute, what is your local makeup, like they're very local problems. So from an awareness perspective, it's the same problem everywhere. And it's the one that people often come and say, oh, if we just fix that, we'll get it set. I can assure you that that is not enough to get it set, because somebody that gets excited today, are they excited in a week? Do they find the right training? Do they find an employer that they like? But that's not really the issue. The issue is that we often think that if we just change their minds through traditional methods, a marketing thing, a conversation, that it's gonna click. And I can tell you, after years of doing this, that we cannot mount a Coca-Cola level campaign to change people's minds of something they're already negatively predisposed for. The only way that's going to happen is if we do the things like opening plant shop floors so that we can wow people with, oh, this is actually what it's like. And if we start getting people into the career path so they can tell their friends. This has to be a very targeted, your mind has changed, tell your friends, tell those around you. Your class went to see this shop floor. All right, great. Now that you're excited, here is a manufacturing program. Here's a career path. Here's a pathway at APS. This is how you can tomorrow go into the pathway. So it has to be very targeted, because we just don't have the resources to change everybody's mind. And we've got to lead right afterward into really tangible things that students or adults can do to get directly into the well-paying part of the job.
So David, I got to come to you then on this, right? So what are you doing right now to help your younger students get sixth grade is when I think they're saying you really got to start talking about career experience and educations with kids to change their minds.
So again, our model incorporates advisory boards that are made up of members from our business community and, of course, our post-secondary institutions. And so they meet on a quarterly basis, and an important part of their agenda is to really review our specific pathways to make sure that the curriculum and the equipment that the kids are using are meeting industry trends and preparing them for ultimate employment opportunities. A couple of examples: our Automotive Technology Advisory Board at Ellet Community Learning Center, they recommended the purchase of a certain alignment machine, which is important for the installation of tires and, overall proper maintenance. Now, that's a partnership at Ellet, with a variety of people. And so that board not only recommended the purchase, but also helped select the appropriate vendor. Of course, the Ohio Department of Education, they update individual course standards every 4 to 5 years. And we make sure we share those standards with our advisory council so they understand what the state is requiring us to do. But when those pathway standards are revised, we work with that pathway to determine if it warrants a new curriculum or resources. So I think we have a very tight relationship with our industry partners in the running of the program, and we have many examples of students being able, as someone said, to see, the manufacturing floor. I was, our business advisory council visited a facility in Cuyahoga Falls some years ago, and there's this kid who's like, I don't know, he was out of high school for 2 years, working there, making like $60,000-$70,000 a year. And, all of our jaws dropped, and it was a clean facility, and it's computerized. They're operating stations, they have to input data, and those are the things that we're trying to help our students understand earlier, and then form relationships with these employers and post-secondary partners so they can continue their education after they leave us.
So Ben, you've been sitting back listening to this conversation, I think, among some of our local folks here. But as you think about how we support from a policy perspective, we talk about all these experiences, et cetera, but at the end of the day, for employees, it comes down to having a good job, right? A job that pays a living plus wage, a job that brings benefits with it, that has advancement opportunities. What policies, as you're sort of looking nationally, do we need to be thinking about in order to ensure workers in industries like manufacturing, healthcare are sort of drawn into those industries and don't have just jobs, but have good jobs?
So maybe I can comment on the conversation that is happening and then hopefully tie it to the policy question. So I am skeptical, my colleagues and I are skeptical based on our conversations with primarily with employers, but also with community colleges, that a marketing strategy or site visits from students to factories is A, scalable, or B, effective, partly because I think to some extent, students' perceptions of manufacturing are more correct than incorrect, that these jobs are low paying by and large, and many of them are taxing and hard. For entry level jobs aren't glory. It's not like a site visit is going to come and convince you that you're going to sit on a beanbag all day or play ping pong. This is hard work, and the trade-offs of a low wage entry level job in manufacturing versus a low wage entry level desk job, I think are really challenging. So I think part of it is on the employer side, that for too long, too many manufacturers have treated the workforce as a cost rather than an asset. And they have not invested in really, through their own HR, developing career pathways for employees. On my side of this, where my work focuses, is that one of the other limitations is that particularly small factories that have the hardest time, because they typically pay lower wages than larger factories, just this is the overall data, they have a harder time recruiting new workers. And they say if they get good workers, those workers are then going to move to a larger manufacturing firm. That gap, or the difficulty of SMEs retaining a workforce, I think is almost exclusively technology based, is that the gap in capital expenditures and technology adoption, that large factories adopt technology at 3 times the rate of small factories right now. So this is, what I see is the key challenge. Now, what can government do about this? I think there are regional solutions, and then there are national solutions. At the regional level, it's really tying technology adoption to training in a way that encourages technology adoption in employers, that matches really what sounds like the excellent training at places like Stark State, but other community colleges that are really preparing a workforce for technologies that only exist at larger firms, or that are really they're only been adopted at larger firms. And then the second, at the national level, and I do work with the Department of Defense on this, there are a few different pieces, one of which is just focusing on the competitiveness of American industries. I think if U.S., particularly lower down in the supply chain, if U.S. producers became more competitive, overall, a lot of these problems would take care of themselves. Now, what does competitiveness take? On the one hand, it takes companies investing in more skilled workforce, in more skilled workers, really upskilling their workers to operate the most advanced technologies. And right now, because we care about higher wages and we care about putting wage floors in place, we're not going to compete globally on low wages. We're going to compete on highly productive, highly skilled workers and excellent technologies. So I think that it's not, I think the minimum wage in terms of non-manufacturing jobs could be a part of the good jobs conversation. It should be a part of the good jobs conversation. But really, this can be about competitiveness too. And I think competitiveness is the way that you get a positive sum solution for both employers and workers.
So pick up on that, Ethan, in terms of the comments that Ben was making on technology adoption. And what are you telling small and mid-sized manufacturers right now about that? What are you seeing emerging there?
They're falling behind. The number of technologies, the collaborative robots, all of those things, the larger companies are adopting that. Other countries are adopting that. Big news about China having a large industrial policy around doing just this. Manufacturers need to be adopting these technologies. The reasons they're not are not just cost. Some of these technologies, to get them implemented, are not hugely costly. They are affordable. However, they're not off the shelf in the sense of you just buy one and plug it in and there we go. And even if it's easy to program them or set them up, you've got to work them into your plan. So that example I said at the beginning of 30% of somebody's time, well, but for the last 50 years, somebody has actually done that. And that's already worked into their flow. So you can't just go and say, oh, here's 30%. Now you got to figure out what other stuff they do with their 30% of the time. And by the way, the robots, when they come, they're not specialized to grip and grab what you need and move it where it needs to go and all of those sorts of things. So you got to figure out how to use all this stuff, let alone all the data that we talk about. When you go in and you can learn every bit of data of every machine and have it go right to a computer, how do you figure out what is useful that actually makes a difference to your production? Those questions have to be answered early on. And then in a small company, the amount of available resources trained to be able to make those decisions, think about them, are very small. And they're also normally occupied with other very important things inside the plant, whereas larger companies can, have a team that is specifically focused on the future of their technology needs. Those are some of the barriers that prevent them from taking it on. But our future depends on two things: how well we adopt this technology as a region, because half of our region is dependent upon manufacturing, as manufacturers. And then the other thing is that we get the people in that can actually run those things. These are the two challenges facing manufacturing 100%. And I agree with all those pieces. The only thing I will take a slightly different approach on is while I agree with the wage issue and that small companies take in people they lose because of higher wages in some of the bigger companies, I also challenge those smaller companies to say, truly, what percentage of your overall cost basis is the frontline worker at those lower wages? And could you not run the analysis to see that the net impact on your margin is not so astronomical because the majority of your costs are already in the goods you're selling and the equipment you're buying? So really, is it that impactful if you do raise the wage? Although I do, of course, agree that at the larger companies, they're going to be more capital intensive jobs. And the other piece of that is, it doesn't matter if the company pays $16 or $17. If we talk to them, they have a problem getting people into manufacturing. So while I agree that if everybody did that, maybe everybody in the career searching field would start looking differently at manufacturing, even when you present it with them, you've got to connect one-on-one with an individual to connect the vision of what that manufacturing environment is with the salary before somebody chooses to join.
So Ethan, if I could just ask a follow-up question. One thing in my work that I see is that younger companies that don't have workers that have been there 30 years and also machines that have been there 30 years oftentimes, that their workforce looks a lot different and their technology composition looks a lot different. And this is also because older companies, they layer new technology on top of old, and it's hard to just digitize your entire factory, particularly when you're integrating old and new systems. But newer companies can do that. They can make that investment from the ground up, and they could actually compete in a different way. And they also, in some cases, attract younger workers who have, who are empowered to be more creative on the factory floor with how they use technology. They have more autonomy. So in my work, I've seen these younger firms, you can call them startups. In the manufacturing world, they're not typically called startups, but they are actually small firms that perform really well and that I think are interesting models. So one of my, I think, more controversial thoughts that I'm a little reluctant to air is this question of whether we should encourage more startup activity, more young firms. And then it's kind of a fight, either upgrade or get integrated for smaller, older firms. And being from a manufacturing community myself, and knowing the great skills and oftentimes contributions of these older, smaller firms that are, many of which are family owned, it's hard to think this, but I really do think the declining share of young firms in manufacturing is a huge problem and could be a wake-up call to help set new standards and show how these things could be done.
Three quick thoughts on that. I agree. However, I think the solution set is slightly different. So yes, one thing you're articulating is, imagine somebody who's an owner who's 65, who's put their entire life and their parents' life before them, getting to them to the point where they have a wonderfully profitable manufacturing business today. And there's this decision point. Do we take money out and live the life that we've been working so hard to build? Or do we take all of that money again and put it back into technology? And that is a decision matrix that a young person coming in without the ownership does not have to make. So that, first and foremost, that this is the distinction between quote unquote lifestyle businesses and the businesses that may stagnate over the next 10 years and we won't be valuable and we'll lose them in 10 years versus the ones that are saying, look, I'll get a bigger payday when I sell the business in 10 years. So that's the first thought, that's absolutely true. The flip side of that is we work with a lot of startups in manufacturing. It's very hard to get capital from anyone to fund these very expensive, slow growing, manufacturers. Now, not all of them. I've been involved in some that have gone to Y Combinator and elsewhere where they have fast growing concepts. Weirdly, they often at some point switch to a more software-based model versus the hardware-based model. But
and produce it in China. They produce their product in China, but yes.
Where I would encourage us to think about this is entrepreneurship. How do we get more of our small and medium-sized companies? Perhaps it's not them, they actually spin it out because they have cash, they have customers, they have some resident expertise. How do we do more of that activity to get the best of both worlds? A younger, newer company, but with the backing and support and knowledge of our existing base. And the third thing brings us back into education, which is those younger folks who have knowledge and awareness of the new technologies, we need to be making more of them. And this is at the 4-year degree level, especially. The folks coming out of engineering programs need to know all of these technologies. So rather than an external party telling you, you need to consider these technologies, it's coming from the inside because everybody's aware of what those technologies are. Another huge role for education.
I mean, this is, we've got so many things that we haven't touched on here, but I think that this idea of, fascinating thing about this transfer of ownership that we're going to see over the next 10, 15 years, I think there's real opportunities somewhere between what the two of you are talking about, where we could incent younger people and create situations where older people can exit current companies and put younger people in charge of them. If there's a way to finance that and help people make that happen, because buying a manufacturing company is not something people think about often. Right? But if we could find a way to facilitate that and support that, that might bring us both the structure of those older companies and the infusion of new ideas. So something definitely to sort of be thinking about. As we
younger, Steve, and younger and or diverse.
Diverse, right.
There's very few diverse owners of manufacturers out there, and to change that equation is going to be tough, but we can do that again as a community. But thinking about those transitions being a once in a generation lifetime to actually make it more equitable as well.
I mean, I think that's huge, because I think as we think about that, we can't find enough diverse suppliers right now for the demands of our supply chains. So I think that's a great opportunity as well, Ethan. So let's do this. We're winding to the end here, and I got a couple questions from the audience I want to get in, but maybe a last thought from and how you think they can be best engaged as we try to solve this problem. And I'm going to start with you, Para, and work my way around.
Steve, I always get it right after you cut out. Can you just, I didn't hear the last, I honestly didn't
sorry.
hear before you turned to me.
My stuff today. So my question is really, what should employers take away from this conversation? What do we think about their role to help sort of, did you get that?
A little bit, but I think I've got it. Okay, let me just, because I really want to incorporate Ben. I was very interested in Ben's and Ethan's exchange. I sit on the governor's executive workforce board, and we met this week. And both the governor and lieutenant governor made it very clear workforce has to be a priority. has to be a priority. It's urgent. And a comment that the Lieutenant Governor made, I think, is very important. He said employers have to participate. And there's been an investment in tech cred in Ohio, allowing employers to get funding from the state to upskill their employees. There's been an investment in ISPs. These industry sector partnerships, Connexus NEO, and our region are beneficiaries of that. But I'm really wondering, so I think employers need to be in the center of everything. And what they need to take away is that we're here to listen to them tell us about their business because they know it best. But then I think there's this terrific opportunity based on this dialogue between Ben and, all of us on this whole idea of the transfer, you too, Steve, on this whole transfer of these ownerships. I wonder if there's not some state policy around that could support more adoption of technology in smaller companies to make them more competitive, more robust, and perhaps, more able to attract owners and employees. So I think that's really important. But from the employer perspective, I really think we need to hear from our employers more and more as we shape the policy here in our region and also at the state. And, it's a little harder at the federal level, but I think we're hearing a lot in President Biden's administration around supporting this whole idea of good jobs. How that happens is going to be interesting. We don't know what that's going to look like yet, but employers have to be in the center of the dialogue and we have to listen to them and they have to participate.
Thanks, Para. David, role of employers and what they should be taking away from this conversation. You're on mute, sir.
Sorry, I was going to say in Akron Public Schools, as we continue to involve our academies and we grow and evolve these partnerships, I want to point out for us, this is a pre-K through 12th grade transformation that has begun in our high schools. And moving forward, there will be less of an emphasis on the number of partners and more of an emphasis on the depth of those partnerships. I think we're keenly aware that this is a two-way street. And, we just ask our businesses to work with our students and staff to provide them opportunities and experiences because they'll help prepare students for success. I have been harping on this a long time when, we talk about talent attraction. I talk about talent development and making that more organic in our community. And we want that success to be in our community and ideally with our partners. As I think Ethan said before, rising tide lifts all boats. So part of the magic of the academies is really to network our students with professionals in the field. And, they're watching and listening and learning about skills and professionalism from these folks in the community. And those same professionals, we imagine one day that these students will ask for a reference and hopefully one day pass them in the hall of an organization as a coworker.
Thank you, David. Ben, what are your thoughts from a national perspective in terms of employers and their role, what they should take away from the session?
Well, I was really interested in what Para said. I think there's a lot for employers to take away, but just in response to what Para was saying, in our kind of community college system and vocational system throughout history, there's been a gap between where educational institutions were at, where employers were at. And I think for several decades now, there has been a drumbeat that employers need to be at the table involved in shaping curriculum. My concerns in some of these conversations is that we might be going too far in that direction. And in going too far, and I'm not saying that I don't know the situation in Akron particularly, but my concern is that if we respond to what employers' needs are right now, I need a machinist, I need a welder, then we're essentially going to be behind in our in how we think about training and developing skills for the next generation of workers. I'll just take Germany, for example. There are a lot of people who put Germany as the ideal training system where there's a consistent meeting to set curriculum between an employers association, a works council, and a government agency, and they set curriculum over time and they update skills as employers' interests change and as the government's priorities change. That would be a really, it's a model that is appealing to a lot of people in the U.S. The challenge in a rapidly changing technological environment is that system, it takes 2 years to adapt to new technologies and to develop new skills. And employers, right, if employers don't want to upgrade, or if employers are lagging behind, like Ethan said, then our skills are lagging behind too. So I think just as employers need to help shape the conversation, community colleges and universities like mine really need to help push employers to say there is more that you can do, and there's more that you can expect out of your workers, who really should be, again, an asset rather than just a cost or someone to assign something to.
I appreciate that perspective, Ben. Ethan, you want to throw a thought or two in? Then I've got a few questions from the audience.
Manufacturers have to, and employers in general have to own this. We have tremendous assets. They're on this panel today. They're out there. Manufacturers, employers need to see themselves as ultimately this is providing opportunities for the community, but ultimately it's the core of every one of your businesses, manufacturing or not. And that ownership means leading, means participating. It means doing risky things. It means investing in your people. And it means figuring out how all of the wonderful assets we have can be better linked, which isn't going to happen by doing it alone. It means working with your other peer organizations, with professional guides like Connexus, with folks that work every day like Para and David, to say, how do we do more so that our students have opportunities? It means helping them convert their world, which is different than the business world, into something that works for everyone, because there is a lot that goes into actually making our workforce systems top-notch.
So a couple of questions. Not sure. Can you guys hear me? Yes.
Bryn, come in and out. We've been catching the end, so go for it. We'll tell you what we missed.
I'm going to ask Bryn. Bryn, can you deliver these two questions here?
Yes, I can. Let me pull them up. So the first question is for Dr. Jones. With the schools that were in various stages of in-person, hybrid, and virtual in Summit and across the state, is there a worry about this unbalanced time of consistent curriculum instruction? Will that harm career readiness? Is that a worry for employers right now?
From our perspective, no. We've continued every single one of our programs at Stark State over the past year. Some of them had to be delayed a little bit, especially last spring, but we found through our a lot of our programs are accredited by third parties, and we work with them to figure out ways to allow our students to use simulation and other technology in lieu of hands-on where we could, and then we delayed some of the practical clinical experiences and still allowed our students to complete their degrees last year and this year, just by being more innovative in our calendar. So I would say no from our perspective, but let me backtrack on that. I don't want this to be perceived that we have not lost something. Ben, Ethan, certainly David know that a lot of people have stepped out of education during the past year because of all the other issues. That will have a lasting impact on our employers. Our challenge right now is to get people back into these short-term certificates, back into thinking about career pathways, because we have had a major, everybody knows, I mean, this is, huge disruption, and we have to be able to counteract that with doubling down on efforts to get people back into college and back into certificate programs, and continuing on career pathways. And I can tell you again, from the state perspective, I know David's working on this because we've met with APS, summer programs, bridge programs. We're working on all kinds of things to make up for that disruption.
Thank you. Any other comments on that from anybody else on the panel?
This is David. No, I agree. I mean, we have to realize there have been some things that have been lost. And, we're working really hard to make sure we have those academic recovery programs in place over the summer for us at a minimum.
Great. The second question, it's not directed towards anybody, so I'll let someone take it if they want it. It says, if scale is a big barrier to technology adoption and that adoption is critical for competitiveness, does that mean that industry consolidation is an attractive path forward? Perhaps Ethan or Ben?
So it's a great question. And there is no doubt, and I'm sure Ben has opinions about this, there's no doubt that scale makes a big difference. Now, I will just differentiate that scale about technology helps, but there's no reason why small companies can't also do this if they set aside the time and energy and strategically don't let them just, focus inside the business every single day fighting fires, and they strategically do it. There's no reason why a small company cannot get themselves technologically advanced. However, there are, of course, advantages to scale that companies are already seeing. And if you ask any business owner, they've been asked 10 times in the last 2 months to sell their business. Multiples are very high for PE firms, et cetera, wanting to roll those businesses up, wanting to connect them. So that is something that is going on in the region. However, as an advocate for small companies, the nimbleness that a small company has is very much an asset for those small companies. It might be harder for them to pilot, but when they decide that they're going to pilot it, they can do it, they can get it done, and then they can buy 10 of them and implement them right away and change their processes, change their customers. All those entrepreneurial ventures, while they might not have as much cash as a big company, it's a lot easier for the owner or the C-suite to say, you know what, we're just going to make this change and pop it in, and we're going to look at it. So it's a double-edged sword. You're small, you're able to make the changes easily, but it's a little harder for you to have the capital and bandwidth to actually think of how to make them. So I think we need a mix, but no doubt there are many people looking out there at opportunities to roll things up.
I think those are great thoughts from Ethan. The only other thing I'd add is think about the structure of supply chains and how they've changed, after the Second World War. Is that really 70s and 80s, these supply chains went from vertical to mostly horizontal and then global. And I think the pandemic has put some pressure on producers, even just think about vaccine supply chains, to bring more activities in-house in order to increase speed and quality control. So if we see more vertical integration of supply chains, when companies previously they had a make-buy decision, it was almost always buy because they could find the suppliers out there. I think as more larger companies decide to make and want closer ties to their smaller suppliers, I think you might be able to see small suppliers through those really strong ties to OEMs adopt technology more easily and maybe have more help in financing it, de-risking it, et cetera. So I think ties throughout the supply chain will be really important. And I know that's a priority for the Biden administration, which is interested in reshoring and ensuring that more elements of the supply chain are in the US. So that's number one. And then in non-manufacturing industries, I would just say there are problems for innovation with rolling up companies or industry consolidation, right? That when your only innovation strategy is let's acquire a new company, I'm thinking about the software industry, it's really challenging for big changes to happen in industry, for new competitors to enter. So this is a big part of the antitrust conversation that I think is important to have.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, everybody. I'm going to close it out on behalf of Steve Millard. He apologizes for a little bit of a challenging connection this morning, but I want to thank our panelists for participating this morning, for the engagement. I think that this is a critical and a timely conversation. We could talk about it for a while, but we really appreciate your perspectives, and for everyone joining us this morning. I'd like to thank our sponsors, our presenting sponsors, Huntington National Bank, KeyBank, Retzel, and Akron Beacon Journal Local IQ, and our premier sponsors, Great Work Employment Services and the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company. I'd also like to invite you to attend our 2021 virtual Greater Akron Chamber annual meeting on April 30th at 11 a.m. We will be conducting our annual meeting of members, celebrating our accomplishments and outlining the Chamber's strategic priorities for the coming year. We will also be announcing the 2022 H. Peter Berg Award winner. The event will conclude with a fireside chat featuring Brian Solis, Global Innovation Evangelist at Salesforce. He'll be sharing his perspectives on topics of digital transformation, business revolution, and the role of leadership in driving change. So thanks again for everybody participating today. We hope to see you on April 30th. Have a great day.